Welcome. In this episode, you'll hear a story by author D.M. Pearson entitled Twilight in Stromness. Ready for a scary story? Good. Find a quiet space, turn down the lights, and let's get spooky. Twilight in Stromness by D.M. Pearson. Chapter 1. January 20th, 2025. North of Scotland. Eyes shut. Cora McGovern stood facing the hot water that poured out of the shower. Steam billowed around her. She could just barely hear the music from the mess hall, but it was subdued under the rumble of the water. Gloriously hot water gently massaged her skin. Her shoulders, back, and feet ached. Fatigue settled in her core, and her mind went numb under the pounding water. She rubbed the back of her neck, trying to dissolve the ache she felt deep in her bones. Just 5 more minutes, Cora thought. A thunderous repetition of fists hit the bathroom door that rattled Cora from her reverie. Cora's supervisor spat a series of taut instructions. 20 minutes until the next shift departs. Bay 2. Don't be late. Her supervisor's staccatic footsteps slapped the linoleum floor in retreat. Jesus Christ! Cora hissed with irritation. She opened her mouth wide and let the water overflow, as if to drown herself. An immense boom. One shrill scream. The light in the bathroom went out. "Come on, you guys, I'll be right out," Cora screamed. She pounded her fists on the shower wall in anger. Another volley of screams, the lights flickered on. The building shook. Cora looked up at the dimming light bulb. Suddenly terrified, Cora reached for the shower door handle as her knees buckled and vertigo washed over her. She closed her eyes tightly and felt herself falling. Blackness. Icy. Needles. Cora's heart fluttered in her chest. Ice washed over her. Her eyes snapped open. She lay crumpled at the bottom of the shower. The frigid water thundered against her torso. The exquisite pain of pooled blood and cramped, unused limbs scrambled her brain. She slowly rolled to her side and crawled out of the shower. Crouched on the bathroom floor, she felt frozen and awkward. She flexed her fingers. She could barely feel her hands or feet. Fear crept up her spine. What the hell happened? How long had she been unconscious? Cora staggered across the room and reached for her clothes, which she'd tossed into a locker. Need to get warm? Her brain hummed incessantly. It took her several minutes to dress. Her hands fumbled with zippers, buttons, socks, laces. Her face burned with cold. As she put on her socks, she noticed that her toes were swollen and purple, which were the telltale signs of chilblains. How many hours had she been there? Days, maybe. Fully clothed in multiple layers, Cora wrapped her arms around herself and looked in the mirror. A ghost looked back. All the colour had drained from her face. "My God," Cora gasped, as she pawed at her face with thawing hands. Cora blinked hard several times and then slowly turned off the shower. Silence descended, like that of a stillborn night. She couldn't hear the noise from the mess hall or from the trucks. Nothing. She opened the bathroom door, which opened inwardly, and a pile of snow slumped onto her feet. Cora's eyes widened, and she looked down at her boots. What the? An Arctic wind blew along the hallway, and ice crystals stung her face. She stepped over the snow embankment and into the hallway. Snow drifts covered the entire hallway. There were no people, just snow. Bizarrely, the lights were still on, and they chased the shadows from the corridor, but Cora could see that the exterior doors were flung open to the darkening night. What the hell happened? Cora thought. Chapter 2. Loud crunches filled the corridor. With each step, Cora punctured through the frozen snow that lined the hallway. A katabatic wind stung her face. Her body shuddered in the cold. I've got to close the exterior doors, Cora thought. After several minutes of struggling, the exterior doors were finally shut. Cora let out a tense breath when she heard the heavy metal double doors click shut. Cora spent the next hour investigating the building. Each room revealed a bare, frozen scene. Clothes, plates, books were all scattered on the floor and covered in several inches of snow. In one room, she found a heavy woolen balaclava that she immediately put on. The last room she checked was her own. When she opened the door, she found her room was just as she'd left it. Tidy, bed made, and backpack slung across the chair. Cora reached into the backpack, extracted a pair of gloves and put them on. She felt the cold air from the hallway permeate the room. She hurriedly shut and locked the door. A tiny wave of reassurance filled Cora, and she sat down on the bed. The room was brightly lit. Outside, the wind scoured the earth, and swirls of snow danced menacingly. The wind rattled the exterior doors of the building. Cora pulled the blanket back and crawled into the bed, fully clothed. She lay on her back and looked up at the light bulb that began to flicker. She felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She pulled the blanket up to her eyes. Her eyes stung with tears, just waiting to be shed. Where did everyone go, Cora thought. Another gust of wind slammed against the building. The light in her room went out. Cora lay in bed and looked out the window into the darkening sky. It'll be dark soon, she thought, as she closed her eyes. Chapter 3. Cora woke to the sound of silence. No wind, no people. It was a barrenness that settled in her stomach. A dull ache reminded her. Food and water. Reluctantly, Cora slid out from underneath the blankets. Everything was still dark, except for the muted ochre glow of the sunrise that was a couple of hours away. Cora found the flashlight and switched it on. Its abrasive intensity illuminated the room. Cora stood still and listened. The world was still closed in silence. She filled her backpack with anything useful. Snacks, batteries, tape, notebook, and other random items. She zipped the bulging backpack and slipped her sturdy arms through the straps. Cora grabbed the flashlight and reached for the doorknob. Instead of immediately unlocking the door, she leaned forward and put her ear to the door. Nothing. Not even the moaning of the wind. Not even the hum of electronics. Cora grabbed her watch off the desk. 9 a.m., January 22nd. Cora swallowed past a lump in her throat and unlocked the door. Cora exited the room. She pivoted left, then right, as she shone the flashlight's beam down the hallway. She quickly walked into the mess hall's kitchen. Containers of shredded cheese and chopped herbs sat open on the counter. A thin layer of ice covered the contents. She walked past the grills and opened a refrigerator. She shone the flashlight inside and saw containers of apples, lemons, and oranges. They were all still cold to the touch. She found a garbage bag and filled it with fruit. She continued her search and found loaves of bread, but they were all frozen. She rifled through the drawers for pre-packed food and tools, which she stuffed into the garbage bag. She found more supplies, including water. In the darkness, she hunkered near her flashlight and sorted through the food. She grabbed a granola bar and ravenously ate it. She ate another. Parched, she washed it down with the one small bottle of water that she'd found. She tried to fill the bottle from the tap, but nothing came out of the groaning faucet. She tossed the empty water bottle into the bag and then shoved the entire bag into her backpack. Cora felt it imperative to get to the closest city, Stromness. She needed to understand what had happened. She desperately wanted to be home, to be away from the madness of aloneness. She felt that if she had to speak just now, that the timbre of terror would tinge her voice. Cora walked along the snow-covered hallway, the flashlight's beam bouncing across the walls. When she reached the main doors, she pushed them open and entered a world of white. Chapter 4. Cora had seen plenty of snow before, but never this type. It glowed a pale periwinkle as it reflected the morning sun. She switched off the flashlight and zipped it away in a coat pocket. She heard the door cinch closed behind her. An eerie stillness descended. Cora wondered if perhaps she was making a mistake by leaving. She turned and looked back at the sign on the door. Northern Isles Paleo-Arctic Research Center. Established 2020, Orkney Island. Several hours and 20 arduous kilometers later, weighed down by her backpack on the lonely road that led south from the research center, Cora could see the shapes of buildings in the distance. Snow still covered the ground, but it quickly diminished to a fine powder as she approached the city of Stromness. On her journey, she'd passed by the Neolithic site of Skara Brae and the black water of Loch Skyle. She hadn't seen a living thing in hours, except for several white-tailed sea eagles that floated down toward her, watching her only to cut through the air and return to their sea cave roosts along the coast. Cora had never felt so exposed or alone. Fatigued, she sat down on a bus stop bench. She slumped under the weight of the backpack. If she could just make it into the city, then everything would be okay. Emboldened with a last surge of hope, Cora stood and continued towards Stromness. Chapter 5. Cora pushed open the door to the petrol station shop and stood in its harsh lights. The shop smelled faintly of petrol, salt, and earth. She heard the click of a clock on the wall. Just after 4 p.m., the hum of refrigerators that were filled with drinks. Cora rapidly filled her coat pockets with bottled water and grabbed a last bottle that she greedily drank. She walked up to the cash register and found the newspaper. January 20th, 2025. It seemed that was the day the world had ceased to spin. Either that, or it had spun so violently that everyone had been thrown out into the abyss. Everyone but her. Cora continued her walk into Stromness. As she slowly walked along Hillside Drive, she finally saw signs of life. A curtain pulled back slightly as she passed. A door slammed shut, and somewhere in the distance, a generator grumbled. Soon, she stood at the marina and gazed hopelessly at the empty harbour. The ferries were gone. Night was now upon her, its heavy mantle subduing her. Fat clouds shrouded the sky. It would rain soon. She turned onto John Street in the hope of finding shelter. She passed by a house with a faint light on the second floor. A shadow moved. After Cora passed the house, a weak, mewling voice called to her. Cora spun around to see a stooped elderly woman who was possibly in her 80s or 90s. "Hello?" Cora called out as she cautiously approached. The woman mumbled and shifted her weight from the left hip to the right, each hand gripping a cane to steady herself. Cora approached to within a few meters. "Where is everyone? What happened?" Cora asked tensely. Cora threw her hands up to the twilight. Tears shone in the old woman's eyes. The old woman pursed her lips and shook her head. A lone tear fell down her softly wizened cheek. Sensing the loneliness of just her and this stranger, Cora's voice wobbled. "Please, what happened?" Cora asked tensely. The old woman leaned forward slightly and spoke. "They're all gone. They all left on the ferries yesterday. They wouldn't let me go with them. Too old, you see," the old woman said. Another tear coursed down her cheek, and she looked up into the unforgiving sky. A moment passed. The old woman looked at Cora and said, "But I don't mind the aloneness. I don't mind the quiet. Lived here my whole life. Figured it's just as well that I die here." Raindrops started to fall. Cora's throat tightened as she yelled, "But when will the ferries be back? We can't stay here." The woman looked at Cora with pity and said quietly, "They're not coming back." A deluge of rain covered them. The old woman retreated back toward her house and called to Cora, "Come inside, dear. I've a few hours left on the generator before the next storm arrives. The storms always arrive at night. I know it's a shock, but you must come indoors." Cora stood and stared at the woman. Then she threw her hood back and tilted her head to the stormy sky. Cora called out to the universe with a baleful chorus of, "Why? Why? Why?" The end. Thank you for listening to Twilight and Stromness by D.M. Pearson. See you next time.